Okay, so we have the new 3.1.0 release for the Quad Cortex. And I installed this when it came out on Thanksgiving, and I've been using it now for a few days. And I kind of wanted to go through a few of the things that were added and talk about them and kind of really look at this 3.1 release. How much is it really adding in? So one of the things obviously is there's new plugin compatibility. So you can see here we've got plugin compatibility for the Fort Nameless Suite and the Soldano plugin. Personally, I don't own either one of these plugins and I don't intend to buy them. I did check out the Soldano plugin a while back. I'll put the link to the video here where I compared it to the model that's already on the Quad Cortex along with some of the captures that I purchased from Amalgam. And the plugin sounds good, don't get me wrong. It's just not something I felt the need to own. So beyond the plugin compatibility, what are some of the things that were added in the 3.1 release? We'll get into some of the new effects and the new amp that's there, but there are some improvements in terms of how you can manage presets, kind of bulk renaming and things like that, or bulk changing the metadata. And I would encourage you to go look at the Neural DSP video to get a real deep dive into that stuff. I'm not going to go deep into that. They did add the ability to import your presets from all plugins. I think that's important. I know when I first started using the Plini X on the Quad Cortex, I had presets that I built on the plugin, and I had to recreate those from scratch, which was a little bit of a pain. And so it's great now that we can import the presets from the plugins if we own the plugin. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the new capabilities within the presets. So I've created this preset here. I'm just going at 3.1.0 presets. I'll make this available on my Cortex Cloud account if you want to grab it. There's nothing revolutionary here. There's a few things here that are outside of what came with the 3.1 release. I added a delay and reverb on the end. I've got a drive pedal, and I've got a compressor up front. So we'll turn those on and off, and we'll look at the settings. But let's start with the new amp. So the new amp is the Fender Deluxe 64 Vintage. So this is pretty similar to the Deluxe 65 reissue, which was a model that was tweaked for this release. So it's not new, but it's been altered and improved for this release. So let's hear how this sounds. For all these tones today, I'm using my Fender Strat, and let's hear how it sounds. So just kind of a nice straight ahead Fender tone. It's a good sounding amp. So let's go ahead and try it with one of the IRs from Amalgam. So one of the things I did on this preset is I'm running in Stomp mode, and I've got Stomp set up to turn on the compressor, the OC2, the Subharmonic Synth, the Nobility 1 Overdrive pedal. I've got one Stomp to turn on and off the delay and reverb. I've got one stop to turn on and off the Harmonic Tremolo, and then I've got stomps to set up to switch the cabs. So this switches it from the built-in 1x12 that goes with the amp on the Quad Cortex to the Amalgam IR, which is a Fender 2x12. And then for the amps, I'm switching between the Deluxe Vintage and the 65 reissue. So let's go ahead and stick with the 64 Vintage, and let's switch over to the IR from Amalgam. And so here's with the built-in cab. And here's the 2x12 IR from Amalgam. So, I do think the 2x12 will have a fuller sound, which you would expect going from a 1x12 to a 2x12. But the 1x12 sounds good. Just a little smaller. So let's stay on the Amalgam and let's switch amps. So here's the 64 Vintage again. And here's the 65 reissue. for me, I find that the 64 vintage has a little more gain to it. You can see here, I've got the volume a little lower on the 64 vintage to get kind of the same kind of tone. So the 65 reissue has a little less kind of gain on tap. So I do think the 64 vintage it's a little bit of a better sounding amp. I do like it better than the 65 reissue. Let's go ahead and crank up the gain a little bit to hear how it sounds. Let's just go up to about 7 here and we'll bring back the output. So a nice tone there. If we switch amps and go to the 65 reissue, go to about 7.5 on this one. So if we crank it all the way, let's switch over to the 64. I feel like the 64, when you push it, you get a little bit more clarity. So both of them sound okay when you push the gain. I don't love either one. They sound good, but not great in my opinion. They get a little flubby, but I do like the 64 more than the 65. Let's go ahead and go back to the settings I had before, and let's add in the overdrive. So this is no Bell D1. We're just adding a little bit of drive, pulling back the spectrum just a little bit, and pushing some level. We try that with a 65. So again, I feel like the 64 has a little bit more edge on the top end. A little bit more clarity and touch sensitivity to it. By comparison to me, the 65 feels a little dead. So let's go ahead and, so we add in some compression on the front of that. And this is just using a dual compressor. Again, pulling back some of the EQ, but just really just trying to add in. 64 right now. So again, some good sounds there. I like the new 64 amp. It sounds really good. I think it's one of the better Fender models on the Quad Cortex. It's a good sounding amp, and I think it's a good addition. So let's go ahead and check out some of the effects. So let's start off with the Chief OC2. So this is an octaver pedal. Like most pitch shift capabilities in the Quad Cortex, if you give it too many notes in a chord, it starts to get confused, especially if you're giving it like a suspended second or something. It doesn't really know how to deal with it. So it's going to be best with single notes. Let's turn on some gain. So if we were to compare that to what you can do with the polyoctaver, which is a little bit of a different thing, but if we pull back the second octave and do a dry 50 in octave 1/100, we go to the polyoctaver. In the polyoctaver, the octave goes up, but the sub goes down. And that note moving around there, I'm not hitting any extra notes. That's the octaver having some issues. All I'm doing is hitting a root and a fifth. So all that moving around you hear is the octaver trying to find the notes. So let's go ahead and move on to the Subharmonic Synth. There's a lot of capabilities here. It's kind of cool. Really cool effect. Obviously, when you go up, it's not affecting the upper notes, it's just the lower note. So it's cool. It's not something I would use a lot. Honestly, neither one of these effects is something that I saw coming and went like, wow, I can't wait for that to come out. Let's go ahead and move on to the Harmonic Tremolo. So we turn this on. You can do different waveforms. So it's a cool sounding effect. Personally, it's not something I use a lot, so it wasn't something that really excited me, but I do think it's a very distinctive sound and can be kind of cool to try something new. One thing I want to point out with this is one of the things we can do on the new release that I like quite a bit is for stomp mode, you can either be in latching or momentary. So the difference there is, so right now for the Harmonic Tremolo, I'm either turning it on or off. So I press it once to turn it on, I press it once to turn it off. If I change that to be in momentary mode. And you can see the icon changed to this little lightning bolt. That means when I press it, it turns on. When I let go, it turns off. So obviously through Cortex Control, that's not a big deal because you got to press and hold it. But if you're using the foot switch, you can press down the foot switch when you want it, you know, and then release it. So I do think this is a very cool capability, and it's starting to add in something that I've been hoping for the Quad Cortex would do for a while, which is this notion of using the foot switches in different ways rather than just turn on, turn off. I'm looking forward maybe to the day where you could do long presses and things like that, like you can do on a fractal, so you can assign different things to the same foot switch and use it in different ways. I'm hoping this is the first step down that path, because I think that's one area that the Quad Cortex could really get a lot of power from if you can take those foot switches and start to do different things with them rather than just press them on, press them off, that kind of thing. So that's a quick run through of kind of what I've been playing around with the 3.1 release. You know, my overall impression of the release is I'm not super blown away by the release. I like the new amp they added. It's a really good amp. I think the ability to have the momentary stomp assignment is a great kind of step forward, and I'm hoping for more capabilities around how you can use the foot switches. You know, the effects are good. They sound good. They're not effects that I personally had any big kind of desire to get. For some people, I understand they may want this and this is important, and I think that's great. The Subharmonic Synth, I'm interested to see how this kind of lays the groundwork maybe for some of the, like the Rabia plugin synth capabilities and things like that. Is this a first step down that path of having some of those synth capabilities? So that's one thing that's always kind of intrigued me, is how they're going to bring that to the Quad Cortex when they finally make the Rabia plugin compatible with the Quad Cortex. So there's some things I like, but my overall impression of this is just kind of meh. You know, I didn't have any issues with the upgrade. It's not causing me any issues. I think there's some small things that are good to check out, but overall, I don't think this release is anything to write home about. You know, they're continuing to do the plugin compatibility, which I think is a good thing. I look forward to getting the next set of plugins. You know, I've got the Nolly plugin I already own. I'm looking forward to getting that on the Quad Cortex. So if you've been looking at 3.1 release and you were wondering what was in it, I hope you found this helpful. And as always, thanks for watching.